Welcome back, everyone. My name is Traap. Thank you for joining me today. Please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this content. Welcome back, everyone. My name is Traap. Today we're going to cover TLC article, which is a LaTeX document class that I produced. It's published on CTAN. The version that you're going to be seeing me use today has not been published. I want to give a couple shout outs to some individuals that I've worked with either on the internet or directly in person. First is Gilles Gnacadja. Gilles is a mathematician. He's world renowned. He's done a lot of advanced math, done a lot of really good papers. I learned a lot about LaTeX working directly with Gilles, and I created this TLC article class based on some work I was doing with him because I noticed that as a mathematician, he had a lot of duplication in his articles, and I thought about this from a computer science standpoint. So my goal was to reduce duplication and standardize on what a document layout could look like for some of the work that we were doing. And I came up with this TLC article and I published it. So I've been using it extensively for my professional and private work that I do over the last couple of years. Next, we're going to take a look at Karl Lervåg. I'm hoping I'm probably not pronouncing that correctly. Karl's done a lot of work with vimtex and with wiki.vim. Karl, I use his plugins. I've been using those two plugins for quite some time now. wiki.vim is what you see me using in all my videos, and you notice that when I'm clicking on or navigating around using that particular tool, that I can bring up a particular page just by clicking on the hyperlink. That's built into VimWiki. So Karl's done an excellent job with these particular tool sets. I would encourage you to look at the documentation that he's written. The helps on these are exceptional. In particular, take a look at how he uses or how he personally uses wiki.vim to organize his own personal notes. So you get a lot of ideas from the author on how he's done that. Karl also built vimtex. Vimtex is a great plugin. I've been using this for a long time. This particular plugin allows you to configure your backend compiler as well as your viewer, and he's also got some really good documentation there as well. So what we're going to then take a look at is his doc is really good here. I'll have all the links for all this content in this video when I post it. Do keep in mind that I also have a URL for my own repo where all the code that I use for my YouTube videos, you can download and experiment with it yourself. So if you want to save yourself a little bit of typing. I'm using for a LaTeX system. You can get some pretty good documentation here on the LaTeX project. If you've never used that site, I find a lot of really useful information there as well. Sorry about the white background. I'm using Okular as my universal viewer, and you're going to see why I use that in a few minutes. Primary reason is because the document sticks in place, and so I can use multiple tabs, and I can use Vim key bindings. So the last thing, the Traap LaTeX class is the class that I built to customize my experience when I'm using LaTeX. It's made it very, very productive. I'm going to do another video series on how I do some auto documentation that was specifically geared toward regulated work, but in that context, I can get a lot of document boilerplate content generated pretty quickly. In the sites that we've used, we actually automated the production of all the documentation that goes into something that's called a design history file. So if you understand what medical devices are and have to deal with Food and Drug Administration, you understand what the device history file is. But think of that as nothing more than a collection of a lot of technical documents that you have to create, and you want to be able to create these on the fly. So one of the other third tools that I built was something that allows me to build LaTeX documents from the command line, so I can run a single command and it'll traverse an entire directory, find all documents that need to be built. So that's something that Gilles and I came up with. So the extension that you would see me using is texx, so that way I can find a pattern in the file names. I didn't want to use main.tex. The reason for that was because you might want to have multiple documents that are produced from the same directory, or you may also want some of that content to go into a presentation if you're using Beamer or something like that. So we're going to see me using some of those things today in this particular video, and then we'll move on to some other content later on. Previously, I told you that I use a utility called docbld, which is a rake. It's a Ruby rake script that I use to find recursively all files in a directory with an extension called texx. So on the right hand side of my screen, I can navigate up and down the Ranger File Explorer, and I can see that I have 3 files that have the texx extension. So back on the left hand side of my screen, if I do a docbld list files, you're going to see that it's going to have found, or that utility finds 3 files that I can compile. If I do a build and I just simply do docbld without any arguments, that's telling docbld to recursively go through that directory and find any file with the texx extension. It does a compilation. If it successfully compiles, it moves the PDF files into the underscored build directory, and you can see that I have the three PDFs now created. If a build fails, you'll get, instead of a copy message, you'll get a message telling you the copy failed, so you know which file it is that you have to go back and do some work on. So if we look at the different directories, you're going to notice that all the temporary LaTeX make output has been cleaned up. But if I want to go into one of those documents and open it up, because of the way I've got my environment set up, my browser will open up with Okular, so I get the different windows being opened up, or whatever plugin I have set up to work with Ranger, so I can actually see those files have been created really quickly. Now, a couple other things that you can do with docbld that are kind of handy if you're having problems getting your LaTeX to actually make, and you're trying to build a bunch of files from a command line. What you can do is do a docbld texx. What that's telling docbld is go ahead and build these files, but don't move the PDFs and don't delete the temporary files. So now if we go back to the Ranger window and we look inside of atomic elements, we can see that there's a bunch of temporary files there. If we go into basic, we see, there's the FLS, which is the file list that LaTeX make. You get a log file, a PDF. You got some different files that are going on. Now that gets kind of clunky to clean up. So what you can then also tell docbld to do is you can say docbld-t, and it's going to give you the targets for docbld. So in this case, I want to do a cleanup. So I'm just going to do a docbld clobber. And you're going to notice on the right hand side of my screen, all those temporary files were removed. So the build output directory does not get deleted when you do a clobber. So if the intent of the clobber is to only get rid of temporary files that are in the directory. If it was actually moved to the underscore build directory, that does not get removed. That's when I would use the remove distr. And that should have removed the distr, so it's really doing nothing more than a remove rm-rf to get rid of all the files that are in that directory. So as you can see, if I've got a lot of documents, in some of my projects I might have 60 or 70 documents that I need to build all at one time, I can just run that command from the root of somewhere on the tree, run it, and it's going to find the files and build it. It's going to put all the output in the same location, so it makes it pretty easy for me to find it. So for example, if you needed to build some kind of a page, a web page or something like that, that linked to a bunch of PDF documents, you can imagine that creating those in a single location and then writing a script to put them into an HTML format, that's a pretty straightforward exercise. Now we're going to take a look at tlc-article, the document class, and the document that I build using tlc-article. So all this content actually gets published to C10 when I publish. So I've got some work in progress right now. I'll be publishing within the next couple weeks. So let's hop right into our main document. Now this is the file that docbld would see. Notice it has one line in it. It does an input statement. So input's pretty powerful, so you can get kind of creative with it. So if we go right into the class, we're going to see that in this particular document, my folds are turned on. I've kind of written it in one file. It kind of makes it easy to put this one together for publishing to C10 because of some of the things that goes on with C10. So we're just going to build this file, then we're going to take a look at what's going on with the LaTeX code. So we'll just kind of give this thing a compile. We're running the same vimtex compiler. Here we go. So here's our TLC article. We just built this document today. And you're going to see all the stuff that I showed you in the other 3 documents. You're actually going to see it described in this document here. So you see that standard header footer. It's the getting started document. It's the release date, the version of the file. We need to change that to match what's in the class. We'll take care of that in just a couple minutes. But some of the prerequisites and installations, it tells you how to go about installing the document. It talks about SS keys and local installations, how you can go about doing that. I'm going to show you a trick that I do on my own computer. So we're going to make a change to the TLC article class itself, and then I'm going to publish it on my local machine. I'll show you how I do that. But it's pretty straightforward. It's got some comments in it, kind of gives you an idea how these things are working. You may remove this installation by removing the TLC article class, that sort of thing. So if you wanted to experiment with this repo, but you didn't want to make it part of your LaTeX distribution, then by putting the tlc-article.cls file in the directory that your file that you're compiling is, LaTeX is going to look in that directory first as opposed to the user or the system-wide areas. So that's pretty straightforward. Here's your layout of basically what TLC article is doing from a layout standpoint. So it kind of goes over where the logo is, the title, the header, and the footer, etc., that sort of thing. I'm not going to read this document to you, but you can kind of take a look at it and get an idea of what's going on. You saw that table of contents, page and table of contents there. It's documented right there. So you can kind of see I'm using some of the code that's coming directly from TLC article. I'm bringing that into the LaTeX document, but I'm also describing a little bit about what's going on in here. The change I'm making right now, I'm getting rid of this L head and C head. I'm using a new syntax that comes out with simple CSV, the L3 version. So I'm going to update the document. I'm going to show you what that would look like. And here's some code in here that talks about how the header and how the footer is done. This information here is actually included directly from the class file itself. So if I've done this correctly, this file is always consistent with what is in the what's in the code. So a couple notes in here, nothing big. I mean, it talks about the different things you can do with this particular class. So this would actually be published with. And then all of a sudden in the document, when I do the final push, make sure that all the packages that I'm using are discussed and disclosed. So if you wanted to install this yourself and you didn't have a full, Tech Live distribution, you can go into this file and you can see the different packages that I'm using to make TLC article work the way it does. So it's kind of some cool stuff. It's pretty straightforward though. So if we go in here and we take a look at that, if you've never built a LaTeX class, there's a lot of different ways to do it. But in this particular document, I've just got the app, you're seeing my document, my fold's turned on. I just kind of rummage through the document and find a few things and just kind of showing you that this is real LaTeX code. And it's also using, so it's real LaTeX code, but it's using TLC article. So the document itself is using TLC article. So it's kind of, the document describes itself, if you will. So I thought it was kind of cool to do it that way. So it's actually showing that I am using my own things, my own work. If we get into, let's see, talk about some of the listings here. I think we have some listings in here. Yeah, so this piece of code here, when I get finished up, I essentially go back to the final code when I'm ready to publish. I go back through the final code one time and I do some copy pasting so I can actually put the code in here. I know there's better ways to do it than this, but part of the reason I was doing it this way is I wanted to make sure the listing package was working. So I really wanted to play around, and when I wanted to have a code listing embedded in the document, I wanted to make sure that was working right. So I did some things that are maybe just a little bit different than maybe you could accomplish these tasks a little bit differently. But I did it this way because I wanted to make sure the things that I really wanted to use consistently throughout documents I'm writing, I wanted to make sure that those kinds of objects, if you will, were actually included in the TLC article getting started document itself. So this document's pretty straightforward, nothing fancy that's going on here. It's talks about a little bit of the macros that I use, and you notice I've got a bunch of variable names that are being expanded at runtimes like TLC, LG, that sort of thing. So if I look at the file explorer here, so I'm going to get rid of the browser here so you can see what I just brought up. But if I take a look in my data directory, I've got that additional layouts. We saw that before. I've got required packages. So here you're seeing, here's a package list. It's got the documentation for the packages. So in the code somewhere, I'm going to have a table list. So if I look in additional layout, most likely, we're going to find a table layout here. So we go in here. we're going to start to see some definitions that I just felt like defining a few things. Again, it was to make sure that things that are in TLC article are working. So any command that I'm defining, like TLC dark blue, some of these other variables, TLC home, GitHub, things like that, those may be variables that are actually defined in TLC article. So I wanted to make sure they were all working. Package names, that stuff like, so there's the CSV for the package names, and then you know, it's not a very complicated table. So I, you know, just package name, there's a CSV style, and then there's a command in here that's actually going to list out that table. So if we could hop back over to the that would be the this document here, we're going to find, if we do the command stop it, start it again, and we're going to find required packages is down at the bottom. So that would be required packages, open that up, and it's got a paragraph, and it's instead of writing a command, I literally included the CSV reader directly in this file because it was so simple. What you saw me doing in the other demos is I actually turned that into a command. I did a new command to actually make that work. So it's pretty straightforward. So if we take a look at the actual class itself, so we'll get rid of this this document again, and we'll bring back up the File Explorer. And if we take a look at the TLC article class, so this is you know, you're building a class. It's a LaTeX class, and you've got some keywords that are a little bit different than your standard. So like, for example, provided class, declared options, process options, load class, that sort of thing. So those are keywords that LaTeX knows you're actually building a document class. So when you want to deal with your page layout, you know, instead of just require package, you got to do the uppercase require. And so this is case sensitive at this point. So you notice I'm doing it's A4 paper top. I've got the margins defined, geometry defined. I also can do multi-column if I want that. And I can bring in a couple different things for doing glossaries, and the order does matter. So I've tried to make sure I get the order in here correctly. So, you know, you've got your L modern, your temp comp, your input ink, and that sort of thing. So those are pretty standard things that you start using in a lot of your documents. When I want to deal with acronyms, I want those to work a certain way, and the glossaries, I want that to work a certain way. So I bring those packages in, I bring in all the dependencies and the options that requires. When I want to deal with colors and graphics, there's that dark blue being defined. I'm doing a table, and I've got an X color, that sort of thing. So you can see this is actually not difficult to do. So think about how you might want to use something like that for, like, whether it's a research paper you're doing, or you're doing schoolwork, or maybe it's professional work. Think about the design of that document. If you take what I'm doing, use it as a starting point, and then customize it to make something that works for you. So I'm bringing in a lot of packages because these things are packages that I use in almost every document that I write. So I didn't want to have to keep defining this thing over and over again. So I just wanted to go ahead and create a class. Because I'm building PDF documents, I want to use PDF pages. I do some ticks, so I do some pie charts. I've got some miscellaneous stuff that's going on with appendices and two notes and if then else type comments. You can do set your margins at 2 centimeters, that sort of thing. For the table of contents, you know, I'm doing the TOC loft. So if you want to know more about each one of these packages, you can find documentation. It tells you exactly what each one of these packages is doing. You're seeing that I'm using fancy header. I've got some tiling. I've got last page. I've got fancy. These are all the parts that were needed to make the header footer and customize and take a lot of control over the header and the footer. You can do some things at the beginning of the document. There's a style. You're telling it it's fancy, that sort of thing. So that's not complicated. If you keep going down here, I'm just defining a couple of colors. Dark blue, black color. So you can kind of do some different things here to get as many colors as you want. Here's some things I'm doing for code listings. So whenever I'm doing that list where it's a code listing, I want it to look a certain way. So I bring the colors in. I try to make it look consistent through the documents, and this sets of colors works out pretty well. It's also kind of printer friendly, so I'm not using a lot of color, too much color when I'm printing. Hyperlinks, if you don't like the colors I'm using for hyperlinks, you change the hyperlink. That one's pretty straightforward. Now here's some of that data definition location. So you've got this location as the data directory. We saw that with the debug macro. So it's using these variables. That's how it knows where to find things. It's using these variables. So it's all relative to the file that you've created. If we take a look at, here's your header and footer. We're going to clear those things when we get started. And we've got some commands for when we're dealing with long tables. We want to make it a little bit easier to, you don't want to have to type all that ragged right, centered, ragged left stuff all the time. So you've got these three acronyms, left, center, and right. And you saw those being used in one of the tables. So I'll show you that really quick. So if we go back to like additional layout and we take a look at a table, we're going to see that there's that macro being used right there. So that's that. Instead of that long verbose thing on left ragged edge, I use L and then the centimeters inside of it. So that was a good find to do it that way. tlc-cls, go there. So there's that macro. That's that new column type. So that's what you're doing. So instead of typing that thing out all the time, because you can imagine that's a pain to get it to work once, you don't have to type it over and over and over again. So this is an example that using those new column types, that's a really good example of when you find yourself repeating yourself quite a bit in LaTeX, start to think about putting that content somewhere else so you can use it over and over again. So ending a table row, ER, so /ER ends it. Got a macro, if input file exists, it'll include it. Otherwise, it doesn't error if it doesn't exist. And then some of the TLC begin landscape. I'm starting to play around with landscape. It's not quite working, but it partially works. Play around with the colors, and there's that debug. So let's take a look at the debug, see what that's doing. So you can see this is definitely more than a command, and it's going to clear the page, create a section, create a subsection, and then use the begin description and put some information into your document so you can kind of figure out what's going on. I found that to be very helpful, especially when I was trying to figure out how these macros were working and expanding. It helped out quite a bit to have that in here. So end landscape, that's self-explanatory. We'll go back to this one. So get environment variable. This will become more apparent when you start using some of the more advanced, another one of the packages that I built called AutoDoc. I'm going to do a quick demonstration of that really quick. But so it's what you're trying to do is find the environment of where where LaTeX has actually been installed on your computer, and if it's depending on how it's been installed, you're able to then find certain things rather quickly without having to hard code a bunch of stuff in your LaTeX document itself. So we've got some things like is defined. So you saw when the debug, there's some text that's either red or green. It's tells you it's defined or it's not defined. So that's where that was coming from. When I'm doing the version part, this command here is actually when we're reading that version file and we're pulling information out of the version file, this little command is defining the part of the version, and so I can then read a single column out of this table when I need to. So that helped out pretty well being able to do that. TLC vspace, it's just a vertical space that I defined. And then you've got that title command that you saw me being used. So if you don't like the way I'm doing the title page and you want to use this as an idea to create your own title page, it's a single command, but you're passing a bunch of information, and it's at this point when you're using this TLC title page and table of contents, it's at this point that you're actually putting content in your document. So this command, obviously must come after the begin document. User default header. So there's some, this command is going to be run based on a couple statements below, but this is going to do, so you can see that this is really a bunch of commands that are being stacked together. So we're saying use the default header, use the logo, use the title, use the version, use the ruler, right? So each one of those are little bitty pieces of code. So if the logo file is there, it uses the logo file, otherwise it returns nothing. And we're going to see that pattern showing up over and over again. And then with the ruler, we do some things a little bit different. I've played with some head heights so I don't get warnings when I'm, putting logos in there if the logos aren't too big. And then we use the version files. So this is that part where it says basically if the version file exists, In the fancy header right, we're going to put in the status, the date, and the version. In the left, we're going to put the institution name in the footer, and in the footer center, we're going to put the permission. Page 1 of n, that's going to show up in the footer in the right. And then if we use the use title command, if that command is being used, then we can format the title so we can take a little bit more control over what we want that title to look like. And then down at the bottom, we're going to do, if this additional layout exists, it simply inputs the file. So whatever is in that input, that additional layout, it's just going to process it. So whatever's there, it's got to be a well-formed LaTeX. It's occurring during the preamble of your document, so you got to make sure it's really clean. Next up is, if the file exists, we're checking the header or footer. So if the header footer file exists, then you are taking complete control of header footer. Otherwise, we're using the default header footer. So as this class is running, it looks for files. If it finds those files, it runs other commands. And depending on where this is occurring in your code, it's either occurring during the preamble or it's occurring after the begin document. So that's really it. It's pretty straightforward. Took a little while to figure out how to do it, but I'm hoping with the way I put my folds in here and the comments in here, this gives you some ideas of, you can play with it, you can tweak it a little bit and change it a little bit to see what it's doing, because this is more advanced LaTeX than what you would typically see, because we are creating a class. We got a bunch of commands that are running, and they do quite a few different things for you. Let's take a look at a basic LaTeX document. I've got YouTube notes in it, so if you've seen my other videos, you know I'm doing find YouTube. I can find the notes we're going to go through. I also have Harpoon running, so I can bring up a Harpoon menu. So you might see me navigating both ways. So we'll just go to the basic document. We're gonna go through this one step at a time. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the compiler. So I'm using NeoVim. I have the vimtex plugin. I'm going to launch the compiler with my leader key, and LL brings up my compiled document. Okay, so now vimtex has launched LaTeX make. It's in continuous mode, so anytime we make changes, we expect to see the document that's on the right side of our screen just re-render. So we're going to go down these steps, and we're going to do this one at a time, and I'm going to explain what you're seeing. First thing we're going to do is change article to tlc-article, and we're just going to save the file, and we expect a small change. The change we're going to see at this point is the beginning of a header and a footer. Let's not worry about the errors that we're going to see right now, because those are going to get cleaned up as I go through the process of doing these steps. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a data version file. So there's a data directory and a version file. So we're going to take a look at that really quick and see what that looks like. So in the data directory, I have a file called version.csv. I'm going to rename that. I'm going to get rid of the extra v. Now, when we go back to the LaTeX document, we're just going to add some text. Doesn't really matter what we put in here, but the reason we're doing this is the LaTeX make compiler looked for a file. It didn't find that file. By changing a file, it's going to cause that graph to be rebuilt. And so we will see, we'll get rid of that, and we're going to see that it will pick up this code changer. We're going to see a little more text on the screen at this point. So you notice in the header now we have the beginning of a header. So we've got the draft, the date it was generated, and the version of the document. At the bottom we've got the author name, a license, and page 1 of 1. So let's go back and take a look really quickly at that CSV file and just look at the information that we have in it. tlc-article looks for a file named in the directory that you're in, subfolder data, file name, version.csv, and it's got 5 columns in it. There's the version, the date, the status, institution, and permission. You put whatever data you want in those 5 columns, and it will get rendered correctly by tlc-article in the header. The documentation for tlc-article, which is generated also using tlc-article, gives a picture or view of what this layout actually looks like. So we'll see that toward the end of this video. But notice on line 2 that we're also embedding LaTeX in the file itself. So as long as your LaTeX is well formed, you can actually incorporate some LaTeX into your header and footer if you wanted to. You have to be very careful about making sure it's escaped correctly and it fits within the column. In other words, the vertical pipe, as opposed to using a comma. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to go down and we're going to do step 4, which is to bring a logo into this. So I've already got a logo out there, so we'll just rename that file. And this time what we'll do is we'll delete the text that we put in. That causes LaTeX make to go back out and run again. And at this point, we don't care about the field, but we do see that the table of, not table of contents, but we see the logo is now in the header. So what the LaTeX makes, what TLC article's default layout is, it will put in the fancy header left, it will put a logo. In the center, it will put the name of the document or the title of the document. And on the right header, it will use Traap. It will use the 3 pieces of information from the header footer. And then across the bottom, you can see where it's got the author name, the license, and page 101. Again, you can put anything you want in there, and it will render it as long as it's valid LaTeX. So the next step that we're going to take is we're going to change this. We're going to comment out this comment, and it also part of step 5 is we're going to uncomment a. This is a TLC article command. It has 3 arguments going into it. So if we split this on the braces, argument 1 is the document name, argument 2 is the author name, argument 3 is the abstract. So we simply save this file at this point. We're going to see it's going to start doing more. Now we have a title page itself. Notice the title page itself does not have a header and a footer, but it has the name of the document. Notice LaTeX is typeset. That's because in the name of the document, I actually put in the LaTeX marker, that markdown language. So that's an actual stylized LaTeX that comes out of the LaTeX package or the text package. So if I look through the document, I'm going to notice that I've got a little bit of code in there. The sentence itself isn't that important. It tells you a little bit about what's going on with fancy header and how I'm using fancy header in the table of contents. But you notice on page 2 that now we start to see that header footer coming back in. And then at the bottom of page 2, we can see we've got 2 of 2 pages, but we don't have a table of contents yet because we haven't defined any sections at this point. So I'm going to uncomment the change I made, and we'll go down to line 12, and we're going to, in step 6, we're just going to unblock this whole comment. We'll uncomment it, and we're going to write that out. And we're going to see that that table of contents is now going to update. So TLC article is controlling the depth of the table of contents. So in this case, I go out 3 levels. It also controls the dots between the section or subsection or subsection name over to the page number. And these are linked. And the coloring is also controlled by TLC article. So now you can see that text that we now see it typeset within the document, and pretty straightforward, nothing really fancy here as far as an overall LaTeX document. We go to the bottom, we're going to see that for step 7, we're going to go to the bottom of this file, we're going to turn on a debug command, which all this command is going to do is kind of show you some of the piece parts that TLC article looks for as it's trying to compile your document. So it looks for a data location, and there are a couple different files that it will read if they exist. There's an additional layout, which we're going to see in the next step. There's the version file, which we've already seen. There's the logo PNG file and the version CSV file. So if these items are not defined, we're going to not use them. If they are defined, then we're going to use them. The key to the information that's in these files is all occurring in the preamble, so it must be well formed and also cannot output anything prior to your begin document. Now what we want to do is take a look at what we can do with a header. So before we jump to the header, I'm going to show you the footer from page 3 and the header, and we're going to see that layout is going to change in this next document. So let's go ahead and take a look at how I would go about doing that with TLC articles. So I bring up go back to my main page here and I go to your header. So we're seeing this a very, very simple document. The content itself in this document is not what's important. What's important is the layout of the header footer. So we'll go ahead and compile this document. Now, keep in mind with vimtex and LaTeX make, each file that you're editing can have its own compiler continuously running in the background. So currently I have 2 compilers running. So LaTeX make is actually running. There's 2 instances of it running, one for each document. So just be aware of that when you're doing this. So if we look at this basic document, we see that title page laid out for us, but now we're going to see that header and footer are completely different. So I'm going to show you how I did that, because I completely overrode that simply by adding, we'll go into this file over here, and what I added was I added a file called header-footer, and it's a text file. So tlc-article looked for that file, and and we can see down in the bottom of our debug information, it knows to look for header footer. So header footer, if that file is defined, you are completely overriding anything tlc-article is doing. So you can go in here and write any kind of LaTeX code that you want to write, and it will lay it out. I happen to be using the version information that's in here, so I've got some defaults that I can use, that if those things are not defined, tlc-article will try to use some hard-coded defaults in that document type class, or it's going to read the version file. So you can kind of mix the two together, so you can get a little bit from the version file, and you can get more specific with your layout. And so I've just done something that's a little bit nonsensical. I just changed the colors of the lines so you can actually see they're changing, and I move things around in the header footer. I don't really care that this isn't laid out correctly in terms of all the spacing that you're seeing in the footer. I didn't really care about that. My point was more to show you you can do these kinds of things. Okay, so because this tlc-article we used the macro to create the table of contents, we also ran the make title command, so we can use the title in our header footer as well. Next, we're going to take a look at a little more advanced capabilities that you can use with tlc-article, and this requires us to use the additional layout. So recall from the previous step, anything that's in this LaTeX file is in the preamble, so you've got to have well-formed text before it hits the begin document. So we're going to take a look at a periodic table. So we're going to be I've downloaded some information from this table, and I've got it in a CSV file. We're going to be using some of the information that's in this table, so we're going to get things like atomic weight and gases and things like that. The information I'm going to be displaying is not really relevant. What's really irrelevant is how I go about acquiring that information to use it in a document. So we're going to take a look at that next. So we're going to take a look at this document that we've got set up for us. The first thing I want to do is show you that this document itself is not very big. It's only 79 lines of code itself. And we're just going to generate that document and see how much information we get created when we bring this up. Okay, so we've got a document with 79 lines of code that generated a 13-page document. So let's kind of walk through some of the things that you've seen already, and I'm going to explain in a little more detail what's going on. So we see that basic header footer, we see that basic title page, nothing really fancy here. You've got that nice layout for your table of contents. Your header and footer shows up on page 2. Your document title shows up in the top of the document. Now we can kind of see some more information that starts to show up. So introduction and body, just nothing really fancy there. Let's take a look at hydrogen for just a second, okay? I want to show you how we're doing this so you can see that the LaTeX code becomes very readable with the way I'm writing it at this point. So we'll take a look at this chunk of code right here. And so the subsection is hydrogen, and it's say the name of the atomic number, get AN1. Okay, that's a LaTeX command that I've written. There's another one that's get NM, which is the name. So as you see that being expanded during runtime, we've got the name of atomic number 1 is hydrogen, whose symbol is H, with an atomic mass of 1.0080. Hydrogen was discovered in 1776. So if you've seen other videos where people are using tables, your LaTeX code can get very cluttered with tables rather quickly. So what I've done is I'm using CSV simple to pull information in from a table. So we're going to go through that very quickly. But I want to show you also in this second section, I have helper functions that allow me to get a single cell out of a table, and I only have to think about the mnemonic of what I want. So in the case I've got, atomic number 111, I'm going to change that to atomic number 11 just by doing a quick down, remove it, save it, and now that whole section 2.2 is going to be sodium. Okay, so all the information in my document just changed. So if I'm writing a paper or doing something that requires me to use content that I'm going to pull from a table, I want to think about how I can come up with a mnemonic to either access a row of that table or access all of the data at one time. So let's take a look at section 3 in this code, and here we've got this thing that says AE, atomic element, year discovered. So here's this table that's going to present these things in atomic order number, and it's going to list all 118 elements that are in the periodic table. Now, what might be subtle here is that the table headers are repeating. I have no idea how much of this noise is being. So first this morning it was landscapers. And now it's the city that I'm running in. They're running by picking up all the recycled trash right now and right outside my office window and making lots of noise. So we're going to cut this out. When the guy goes by, we'll start over, and hopefully there's some stuff we can use here. Tabular data. You've got a lot of control over how you can make a table look. Some people like it to be gridded out like I'm showing here. Some people don't want to see the lines in between cells or rows. That's a design choice. Design that in a way that makes sense to you. Notice that we have this section called gas. So it's atomic elements, hex codes for gas. So when we do this particular query, we're asking the list to give us all of the hex code colors for the gas elements, or we're going to do the liquid elements. So anything that makes a hit on liquid, we're going to put that. Now in the next section, we're doing solids. Okay. So there's more solids, obviously. And then when we get down to a general list, this next one gets really advanced, because what we're doing is we're using a generalized list, but we're also passing in the names of the columns that we want to match on and the value we want to match on. Plus, we're also passing in the names of the columns that we want to actually have displayed. And then if we got a lot of data, like this last one, and we want to make the text small, we can go in here and do something like this, where we tell it to make it tiny so we can get more information out. So in this particular one, I did the liquids, and I did some atomic data, so you can get melting points and boiling points, things like that. Okay, and then we followed up with their standard. Here's TLC article, here's the debug information, so I can figure out what I'm doing. Okay, now let's go behind the scenes and take a look at what TLC article is doing when all these elements are defined in your data directory. So in my data directory, I've got additional layout, I've got the elements CSV file, I've got the logo, and I've got the version. So elements is the information I downloaded from that website I showed you earlier. So what I want you to see here is this is a rather large table. So we're gonna go ahead and close this really quick, and we're also going to close that window. And I'll get that closed really quick. So you can see this is a pretty large table. So in this file, there's 118 rows, and I think there's 15 columns. And I cut out a couple of columns that I didn't really care about, but I just downloaded the information to just show you that we're processing a reasonable sized table. So, I'm going to pull out particular cells as we go. Okay. So now let's take a look at the additional layout. So I'm using CSV simple. And one of the things that CSV simple has is it has a CSV reader, which knows how to read a file. And then you have some options that you can use. You have file names, assignments, and a command list. So what you're seeing in this top section is the way I go about understanding how CSV Reader is actually being used. So we can do some things with tabulars, right, left, and center. That should be a center there. And we can do things with the header. We can do some things with the footer. So this is all in the context of a table. If you look at the fancy header documentation, it's going to use a matriculation system and grades for a particular college course, for example, college courses. And so it kind of shows you doing assignments and doing grades and things like that. So it's nothing fancy. So in my context, I'm using a file called data elements, which is the file that I just brought up for you. CSV names is a way for you to use, that's part of CSV Simple. It's a way for you to give each one of the column names in the table a unique name. And I use this extensively because I only have to define it one time. A lot of videos that I see people showing you how to use tables, they're constantly redefining table names. If you've seen any of my other videos, you know that I'm a bad typer and I hate duplication, so I try to avoid it as much as possible. So here's the list of the 15 columns, and I use short two character acronyms, and I give you the name of what each one of them is. So if I want to deal with the standard state, I know it's going to be AESS. I could spell these out longer if I wanted to, but I chose to do it short this way, but these are the columns that I'm using. So the hex color style, here is a particular style that we're using that we're going to say we're using a long table. Now a long table is that thing that causes splits between pages to work and causes the headers to repeat. And you can see this is pretty straightforward. Now a lot of times when I'm seeing people demonstrate how to do this, they jam all this stuff together. And it becomes, to me, very, very unreadable when it's one long line. So I like to put a lot of spaces in. The pretty formatter, you kind of have to pay attention to what it's doing because it could make some things look rather ugly rather quickly. But I try to make it where it's very, very easy to read. You guys know I keep everything at 80 columns. So, I've got this named style that I can use. So whenever I want to use it, it's AE hex color style, and I can use that style. I have a similar one for AE year discovered. Nothing fancy here. A couple keys that you want to look at with long table is you can specify at the centimeter level. If you want to use millimeters, use millimeters. I go ahead and put in the whole number, so I don't just put in 1, I put 1.5 because that way the typing's there if I want to start tweaking it just a little bit.Maybe I want to go to 11 millimeters, so I put in 1.1 centimeters. Okay. Respect all is important because if you're using embedded LaTeX, you don't want it to interpret that incorrectly. So that respect all is very important. And then you notice here on line 11, I'm using AE names, and on the other style, let's go back and look at that one. I'm also using AE names. So that way I don't have to type that set of column names again and again and again. That's just those are the names that are available to me. It doesn't mean they're being displayed. That's what the names of the columns are. So now here's an example that year discovered command. So I've got this command called year discovered. It checks for the existence of the file. If the file exists, it's going to run CSV Reader and it's going to use the year discovered style. It does a respect all, and it says the separator is a pipe. And then there's that file coming back in. I don't need that argument. Here's the names of the columns that I want displayed. So since I was using AE file in the style table, which came out of here, all my column names are already known, so I don't have to redefine them when I'm defining a command or anything like that. So hex colors, same concept. So we're just using a different style. So we're using a different style, and then we're using different column names. Those could be any column names I wanted. I just kind of did some copy pasting just to set up the demo. Now here's this general list. Now this one gets a little more sophisticated because what we're doing with the general list is we're actually passing in an argument. So in the general list, we're actually passing in the names of the columns we want displayed. So if I've got this generalized thing that I want to do and I want to get them all, and all I want is the atomic number and maybe the name, I just pass in those two as argument one, and it just kind of works, right? So if we go down to the atomic list, now this one gets really complicated because we're passing in 4 arguments. So I can pass in that style, so I could pass in the general style, the hex style, or whichever style, or I could create another style. I pass in the name of the style. The filter equals, that's the name of the column I want filtered on. There again, we're going back to why we're using that AE names. I don't want to define the names of the column multiple times. I define them exactly one time and then I use them. So if LaTeX blows up on me, it's going to be because I passed in a bad argument. Okay, so you see that same respect all separator of a pipe. There's the file name. Argument 4 is the list of column names that I want to see. So pretty straightforward. So if we hop back over to this document here and we just compile it one more time, I stopped it, we'll restart it, there's that file. So we just were looking at these tables. I was kind of explaining rather quickly how they're put together and how we can change the content that's in those tables. So that last one was pretty sophisticated, where we're using the generalized list, but we're also adding in the style. We're passing in, we want a solid state of liquid, and we want to pass in this particular case, we did atomic data. So note that in using that AE list, I'm getting different looks, different columns, and that's very, very easy to do when I'm doing it this way. So in the case of I wanted smaller text, I surrounded the command with tiny, and then now I've got something that's very readable. So if you think about this for just a moment, once I have that table defined, if I need to write a paper about a particular element or a set of elements, I define that table one time and then I reuse this like crazy. Now what you're going to see in my next video when I get into some more auto-generated documentation, you're going to see me doing some things with tables where I've got data coming in from multiple sources and I end up producing a lot of different tables. But in the context of the document itself, the document is very readable because you're not cluttered with all the table definition. You're going after the rows. So in this particular case, if we looked at that atomic number 11 here, or what's on line 23, you're seeing me use that same string or command in multiple places.